Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
So let me tell you a little bit about our new friend, Krsanna Duran. She has, first of all, let me tell you, her website is very, very interesting, and I highly suggest everyone go check it out. It's paralleldimensions.us. Krsanna is a author, editor, and publisher of Web of Life and Cosmos, Human and Bigfoot Star Ancestors, a premier paranormal UFO investigator and Native American activist. She provides us with the requisite tools to make the connections with a vast array of seemingly disparate phenomenon. Going beyond mere chronologies of mysterious lights in the sky reports, so typical of many contemporary ufologists, Duran carefully selected those UFO cases directly tied to the fulfillment of prophecies made long ago by the seers among various ethnic groups, particularly Native Americans. Other phenomenon considered and linked include the sundry ages of humankind on the Earth, the influence of numerous extraterrestrial civilizations in our cosmic development and continuing evolution, the application of time travel technologies, and the interconnectivity of all life throughout the universe. Without further ado, let me welcome Krsanna Duran to the show. Welcome. How are you today, Krsanna?
Very well. I'm very happy to be here.
And we're very happy to have you here. So thank you for joining us today. Krsanna, as I mentioned earlier, your website has so much information, and it's website layered upon blog, and just so much research and time I can see that you've put into this type of work. Let's start off. Let me start off by asking you, what was it that drew you to this wonderful and very interesting alternative research that you become known for?
Well, I'm glad that you asked because it's the key to where I have ended up with it. I am a UFO experiencer. I have been all of my life. I had my first major face-to-face encounter in 1963, Oklahoma City. I was 15 at the time. It was totally conscious. Um, in that contact, they gave me they were I did get an examination, and then I had a little talk with a man. He looked just like an ordinary man. He was probably about 5'8". He was bald. He had grayish bluish eyes with sort of yellow marbled into it. And he told me I had lived many lives in the past and I would live many lives in the future. So I was put back on the street where they picked me up. And like I said, I was 15 at the time. And getting picked up by UFOs was not popular in Oklahoma City. But I wasn't traumatized. I just didn't make a big deal out of it. Just wanted to more or less forget it happened so I didn't have to tell my friends about it.
Mhm.
And then in 1980, I had another major contact and a more major one in 1985. And in 1992, I commenced an incredible series of contacts that involved visible craft with telepathy, so that I was able to connect the telepathy with the craft. And um, the contacts in that, by that time, were, as I understood them, were Arcturian.
Mm.
And they, and I will give you some information about that that I really do not discuss often. But at that time, they did tell me that they were in contact with Jose Arguelles,
Huh.
and they asked me to look at the dream spell. So that was in May of 1992. And when I got the dream spell, I was just baffled. I said, this looks like a game. I don't understand what you've done." But I did go through the dream spell, figured out what, Jose's premise, and it had a grid in it, an an energy grid for the Earth. And I could not find any correlations between the grid that Jose had published with the dream spell and the date. So that was my response. I said, I just can't find any connection between these. I need a better grid. And they told me that five tetrahedra interpenetrated was the best model for the Earth grid. And they told me that it contains all the that it embodies all the prime geometries. I asked a friend of mine who was a mathematician to make a model, a 3D model of that, and I figured out how to align it with the glyphs in the calendar. And in 1996, um, in another contact, they showed me how to use it to make predictions. And I had always known that the ancient timekeepers of Mexico predicted storms, um, life cycles, and that sort of thing with their calendar. So I thought, well, if this calendar really works, we should be able to predict things with it. We should be able to predict cycles of earthquakes and storms. So I asked them about that. They showed me how to do that once, and then they left. And and it just so happens, amazingly, that that was in April of 1996. He told me how to do it, which is different than the dream spell. And in other words, I used the glyphs. I timed them differently than Jose's dream spell did in order to do Earth predictions. I did my first prediction in April of 1996, and I carried it out through July of 96. And on July, I think it was July 16th or 17th, the glyph was the the calendar came together with the grid at Hawaii. And lo and behold, on that day, it was actually 24 hours later, um, which is I give myself 3 days before a date or after a date, because the Earth is a big system, and it doesn't function on a digital clock. You've got to give your cycles time to process. So on that date, however, the Loihi seamount collapsed at Hawaii. It was a history-making collapse. Um, there were just thousands of microquakes, earthquakes, and there were a number of articles uh, published about it in the science community. So, and I was blown away. I honestly couldn't believe it. So I said, well, I'm going to have to try this again. So I continued to do predictions. And what I learned, and I have done that since 1996, which we're going on 20 years now. And what I have learned is that these this the system that I use with uh, the tetrahedra grid, which I call the time star, it does actually show a cycle in the Earth grid, and it is a 13-day cycle. In other words, what the Chinese call the dragon path, which is movement of energy through the Earth, moves in 13-day cycles. And I can actually track that. And that is how I got started with it. So anyway, from that point, I I was able to tell, since I had a baseline, I was able to tell where the natural Earth cycle was moving, where to predict it, and I began to realize when things happened that were off cycle, they were not part of the cycle, I would go look for them. And I found HARP, various human activities. So what I found is many, many layers of activities. One of them, the basic Earth grid, which the Chinese called the dragon path, and others were the activity that we humans are putting into the grid. And from that point, they also told me, and this is a startling announcement, this is startling, that they told me in 1992 that they had built the pyramids at Teotihuacan, and I had never heard of them before. I didn't even know they existed. They said those were their pyramids, and that the calendar had been embedded at that pyramid center. Now, in 1992, a lot of research had been done with the Maya, but the connection between Teotihuacan, which is in central Mexico, 35 miles from Mexico City. Teotihuacan is the oldest pyramid complex in North America, and 35 miles from Mexico City. The Maya are hundreds of miles south. And at that time, the Maya were very well known, and not much research had been published about the connection between Teotihuacan and the Maya. And later in the late 90s, around 98, several books, a very credible book, was published about the role that Teotihuacan played in the Maya civilization. And basically, it has now evolved in the last 20 years that Teotihuacan was Mexico's mother civilization, mother culture. And the long count that ended in 2012 was first recorded at Teotihuacan, and all the numbers for the calendar that the Maya later used were recorded first at Teotihuacan. And from there, I began to study Teotihuacan. They had said this was their center, they had built it. And the amazing thing, or one of the many amazing things about Teotihuacan, is that it was built in 200, the first pyramids were built in 200 BC. And it was the majority of the people, of the population, at one point, had a population of at least 200,000. It was the largest city in the world at the time that Rome collapsed. And around 600 AD, which is 800 years after it was first constructed, the original builders just disappeared. Nobody knows. It's very similar to the Great Pyramid in that The original builders did not leave a signature. And they just completely left this huge pyramid complex, which I believe is about 4 by 12 miles large. It housed 200,000 people. Anyway, they just abandoned it. And Esther Pastorzi wrote, well, she published a book called Teotihuacan, An Experiment in Living. And it was published in the late 90s. And Teotihuacan was a meritocracy. It did not have an aristocracy of any kind. And the government, the nation most similar to Teotihuacan's governance is the United States. It was the model for meritocratic government. Teotihuacan's influence spread all the way into Guatemala. They had an embassy in Guatemala.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We were having a very in-depth discussion about the history of the work of Krsanna and Duran. Krsanna, you sounded like you were just about to tell us a big aha. Could you remember where we left off?
I don't.
Oh.
But I do want to say that on paralleldimensions.us, I have a link for spotlight predictions, and I have a link for the psi factor, and I have a link for 200 years. And the 200 years is what I have learned about our future. Basically, it's what I've been told.
Oh, okay.
When I began doing the predictions, I actually was very, very stringent in that I actively worked to make sure that I was not using psychic perceptions when I predicted. First, I insisted on having predictions because that's the only way to prove a theory, right?
Of course.
And so I have documented predictions since 1996. When I say documented, I mean I post them in advance, and then they are archived and date stamped, and they cannot be altered after I do that.
Oh, good.
Okay, so I have 20 years of predictions in advance, and some of them have actually been really astonishing, even to me. And like I said, I worked to make sure that I was not using any psychic perception because I wanted to use this as a tool to that anyone could use. You didn't have to be a psychic. All you have to do is learn the system, and then you can use it too. So those are the spotlight predictions.
Very, very cool. Krsanna, I have a question for you, and I'm very, very curious, and I've been waiting, I guess, since I booked you on the show to ask you this.
Okay.
The subtitle of your book is "Human and Bigfoot Star Ancestors." What did you mean by that?
Well, now we are. What I meant by that is that we humans, Homo sapiens, we're actually Homo sapiens sapiens,
Hmm.
and Bigfoot share ancestors. And um, our early this there have been many human species on this planet. There was not just one human species, and our early ancestors, uh, starting with Neanderthal, were Arcturian.
Mm.
The Arcturians had been on this planet hundreds of millions of years ago. They left. Um, they left before the um, the meteor impact 65 million years ago that killed off the dinosaurs.
Mhm.
And the way they told me the story, the way the Arcturians told me the story, was they had been in the Orion system in ferocious wars when the Horsehead Nebula went supernova, and they escaped, and they came to this planet 225 million years ago.
Wow.
And at that time, they were just rejoiced to have a planet that they could settle on that was not at war, because apparently the wars had been in Orion had been horrendous. But when the Horsehead Nebula went supernova, it mutated their DNA.
Mm.
And that DNA mutation is entangled in a quantum mechanical sense with the Horsehead Nebula. And it gave them a tremendous psychic ability and long range, because it is entangled. The mutation originally was entangled with that supernova. Now, as humans on this planet, in a galactic context, um, we are viewed as extremely psychic. Lynn Buchanan, who was an early military remote viewer, I don't know if you're familiar with him or not,
No, but
but
I'm aware of the work.
yes, well, he worked with Ingo Swann. He was one of the first military remote viewers. His work is fabulous, Lynn Buchanan, and he recently did an interview with Linda Moulton Howe, and as an example of the quality of his work, in 1986 he was asked to remote view a UFO incident at Rendlesham Forest in England,
Hmm.
and in 1986 he drew exactly what he saw, which was a triangular craft. In He was asked to view the incident, right? So he remote viewed the craft. It was triangular, and he remote viewed incubators inside of it. In other words, that craft was a huge incubator. It was filled with incubators. It was a traveling incubator looking for a place to land.
Oh.
Okay, in 2000, the CIA declassified his remote viewing, and in 2010, the prime witness went public and described the exact craft that Lynn Buchanan had drawn in 1986.
Mm.
And in that period, the CIA asked him, I assume it was the CIA, because they were the ones who declassified the work, that asked him to write a paper about psychic and non psychic extraterrestrial races. And um, there are there are some ET races are not psychic, by the way.
Okay.
He found that there were ET races that were psychic, but they had a very short range, which is, he says in the interview, that's the reason sometimes these UFOs get right above you to transmit, because they don't have a long psychic range.
Oh.
However, we humans on this planet have an enormous range, but we have a weak psychic force because we haven't developed it. If we developed it, we would have a strong psychic force and a big range. So that comes, I believe, from that ancient Arcturian influence
Hmm.
and that mutation from Orion. So anyway, the Arcturian, they're not the Arcturians per se, they are the ancestors of Arcturus, who were here 225 million years ago. They then left. They said that they devoted themselves to healing the earth when they came here, and then the earth killed them. and they were able to leave this planet. They went back out into the galaxy, and they seeded many human species in the galaxy. They have now gone basically, they're no longer physical.
Mm-hmm.
They have left behind a number of physical species, and we are one of them. So at one point, the Arcturians, now these were the ancients, were the ancestors of Arcturus, but now we have the Arcturians, and they were considering returning to this planet. And in order to study the planet, they developed Bigfoot as a species to monitor the planet. And there are, for example, they said there are gases that we don't even know about that can be dangerous. They had to have a, a species capable of surviving in the wild under extreme conditions that was sensitive to um, to the human needs and human nature. So they gave Bigfoot, he was bred to do this job with 20% human DNA.
Oh.
After Bigfoot was introduced, and they said a little less than 300,000 years ago, Neanderthal was soon introduced. And this is a very, very important point. Why Neanderthal was introduced. And the reason is that souls, a soul force was inherent on the earth. It was, when I say a soul force, I mean a human soul force, a soul force with a human ego. And it had started to incarnate in apes. And in order to provide that, that human soul force a vehicle for its own evolution, in other words, evolution of the soul,
Mm-hmm.
they introduced Neanderthal. And at the same time, we had several other ancestors. We had the Sumerian ancestors, and we had the Atlanteans who were from Aldebaran. And what has happened is that that basic human Bigfoot evolution that they introduced has now mingled with numerous other extraterrestrial races, and we and to be Homo sapiens sapiens as we are today. And that's what I meant by that.
Oh, that's quite fascinating and wonderful, wonderful work on your part. Krsanna, I have a question. We've only got about 15 or 10 minutes left on the show, and I'm very curious as to, in your book, you say that you are sharing cases, that UFO cases that have been tied to the fulfillment of prophecy, particularly by Native Americans. Can you give us some examples of these UFO cases that are tied to these prophecies that we're talking about?
Well, there are a number of them, but the two main ones were the UFO, the huge, most highly documented UFO contact in history was over Mexico City on July 11th, 1991.
I
Um,
remember that.
you remember that?
Yes.
That contact, that the UFO activity that started on that day had continued for years, for decades. It still continues. The Mexican government ultimately acknowledged that those were ETs, UFOs, and they released images of the UFOs that they were taking. All right, that that date, July 11th, 1991, was the date of a historic um, solar eclipse. It was one of the longest ones in the 20th century, and it had been predicted in the Dresden Codex of the Mayan calendar. Now, the Dresden Codex was taken out of Chichen Itza in the Yucatan. Chichen Itza had a huge influx of Toltecs from the Mexico City area from Teotihuacan. After the original pyramid builders abandoned the pyramid complex, the Toltecs had moved in, and they are the only ones who probably had contact with the original pyramid builders. And by 900 AD, these Toltecs had migrated to Chichen Itza, and they brought with them Teotihuacan architecture and culture. And at Chichen Itza, you get an integration of Mayan style architecture and Mayan culture and the Teotihuacan architecture and culture that the Toltecs brought with them. And so Chichen Itza is more like Teotihuacan than any other Mayan center. And those timekeepers, by the way, I use the glyphs from Chichen Itza. They are, every pyramid center had its own stylized glyphs, and I use those from Chichen Itza.
Uh-huh.
And they had the timekeepers at Chichen Itza had predicted the date of that eclipse in 1991. So there was the fulfillment, a major fulfillment of the prophecy through that calendar. Did I make that clear?
Yes, yes. My, that's amazing.
Right. And then another one is the Phoenix Light sighting. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm sorry, what was that?
The Phoenix Light
Oh,
in
yes, of course.
March of 1997, March 13, I think. And Phoenix is um, there's a concentration of Teotihuacan culture in Arizona and New Mexico. And basically, the Phoenix Lights were a return of the ancestors.
Oh, really? Wow.
I'll give you an example. You know the spider grandmother, the spider woman tradition of
Yes.
the Southwest Indians. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they say that spider woman, spider grandmother, or spider woman cast her web into the stars and created humanity, created life from it.
Right.
Well, at Teotihuacan, there is a mural, which is in my book. I have copied it, um, where it shows um, the mother goddess or the great goddess sitting under a huge tree of life with spiders dangling from it. So, and the other thing that ties into that is that scientists, Western scientists, had long suspected that that there was a web that sort of connected distant galaxies, and they actually likened it to the web of Spider Woman's web.
Oh.
And in 2014, the scientists photographed that web. They got a uh, groundbreaking photograph of the web that connects distant galaxies using the light from a quasar. Of course, in deep space, your problem with photographing something like that is getting enough light, but they did figure out how to do it using the light from a quasar, and they photographed it. The paper on it was published in Nature Journal, and the scientist who wrote it the lead scientists, actually compared what they were able to photograph with Spider Woman's Web of Life in the name of the book, my book.
I was going to say, and that's why you call it the web of life and cosmos. It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
And now that they've managed to actually find out that the web that the Native Americans that apparently had considerable contact with Teotihuacan and at Teotihuacan, now that they have photographed it, found that it's true that that galaxies are connected with this. Now there are theories that black holes actually line up in a pattern too.
Oh, wow.
I've just seen that mentioned. Nothing has been published in terms of of evidence, good, hard, solid evidence,
Right.
but that is suspected now.
And it would make sense that it seems that everything in the universe has a pattern. So why not black holes?
Right. Now,
That's wonderful. Krsanna, we're running out of time. We're down to our last 2 minutes, and I just want to give you the opportunity to share with us a bit about your book, where people can find it, and any other interesting notes on it that you would like to share.
well, on paralleldimensions.us, I have a link that book can be purchased. It's also on Amazon.
Oh,
And
good.
I have a link up here at the top, Web of Life Images, where some of the things I have been talking about, you can actually, I have posted the images so you can follow them.
Oh, great.
And what we have found is that what was once considered superstition and myth of indigenous people, the primitives, we have that we are now penetrating with quantum sciences to find that they are substantial, they are founded in realities that can be perceived, they can be measured
Wow.
in the cosmos. And we are very much, our human species
I
is
love it.
totally entangled in a cosmic web of life. And that is what we need to understand. And our our
Oh, well, I want to thank you, Krsanna. We didn't have enough time to finish that part, but I want to thank you so much. I look forward to actually having you back on the show. You have so much information. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next week. We are going to have Ray Hernandez from the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, and the work that they're doing is going to be shared with the public this week, actually. I look forward to it, and we love you very